tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
This is an issue that has saddled gun stores with, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars of inventory that they cannot move. And even outside of those specific prohibitions, it is an uncertainty that has now affected this, where why would you run a business when the government could ban the things that you are trying to sell? I wanted to talk about this issue a little bit more from the perspective of the industry itself, which, by the way, is not dominated by these big multinational billion-dollar corporations. It's often small mom-and-pop shops across this country. Wes Winkel is here. He's the president of the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. Wes, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Just set the stage here first off. I alluded to it there, but what is the profile of a firearms business owner in Canada?
Typically, you hit the nail right on the head. It's one of those things where most of them are mom and pop shops. Typically, you're looking at an employee base of 5 to 12 employees. In many cases, a rural business or in a non-urban area is where most of our businesses are located.
One of the things I should point out, when I was filming that documentary in which your predecessor in your position was a featured guest, one of the challenges whenever we were interviewing owners of gun stores is that every 5 minutes someone's walking in and they were old friends. They knew each other. I mean, these things have actually become somewhat of community hubs as well, your neighborhood gun store for people that are in sport shooting and in hunting. And that's not something that a lot of businesses in this day and age get to do.
No, it's a very unique situation. It's we always like it that old hot stove league mentality, where you have a lot of folks coming in on a regular basis to go ahead and chew the fat about their event and their sport, and they like to come in and talk about it. And it's a very small, close knit community for sure, and it crosses a lot of different realms of employment. There's people that are farmers and rural shooters and hunters, but then you have lots of urban gentlemen and ladies that participate in law enforcement and the military that like to practice their craft outside of their work. So there's a lot of different aspects at play.
So I know that the handgun ban, when I believe we lost you, so we'll have to get Wes back there. I'm speaking to half of my, there we go. I was speaking to half of my logo there. I know that the handgun ban was actually quite a boon for gun stores. I know gun stores all of a sudden couldn't sell handguns quickly enough because there was a bit of a phase-in period. But for the Order in Council, this effectively locked up huge amounts of inventory that, I mean, certainly in the cases of businesses I've spoken to, they've not been able to do anything with for effectively 3 years now. What are the effects of that if you're a gun retailer?
They're immense. Just like you had mentioned in your previous segment about stale inventory, and stale inventory is the death of retail as a whole. But on top of that, you have costs associated with it, not just warehousing costs and holding costs, but insurance costs. For a lot of us that are holding hundreds of thousands of dollars in inventory, it costs you $10,000s of dollars a year to insure that inventory, especially when the government puts a prohibited tag name on it. So it's a very expensive thing to keep in our inventory, and we've had no ability to have a lawfully or a legal aspect to dispose of this inventory. And it's got a great deal of expense, as well as taking up very valuable warehouse and retail space.
Has there been in the members that you've spoken to a sense that it's just not worth it anymore? Why would I spend so much of my time, effort, and money in this industry that the government could basically outlaw overnight?
Absolutely. There's been a fatigue. We've seen a lot of businesses in the last 6 months across our great country close. And it's a combination of financial viability, but just overall fatigue of overregulation. It's not just on the firearm side, but on the ammunition side, the regulations when it comes to importing and exporting. I mean, we're just so heavily regulated that there's a level of fatigue, and you're in a situation where it's a lot of these owners are a little older, and therefore it's a little bit harder for them to maintain keeping up with all these online regulations and constantly being on the internet and logging into the RCMP website and getting permission to sell stuff. It just gets difficult, and they just get worn down and retire from our industry.
In terms of representing the industry side, your group is pretty much unparalleled, I would go so far as to say. So, has there been, at the very least, consultation or adequate consultation from the government on what a resolution would look like?
Yes, we've had some consultation. We didn't have any consultation before the OIC, but then we
Which
made
is
it.
ideally when you consult before you do something.
Absolutely, and to be honest, the OIC is so poorly written, which is why we've had this long delay and why there's so much, it's so difficult to bring this program forward because we're really at a spot yet where we still haven't quite determined what actually was prohibited. You mentioned at the start of your segment at 1,500 makes and models, and that was what was originally listed by the government. But then they've added on 300, 354 makes and models that they found out were caught under the same net as the original prohibition. So we're still trying to determine what exactly was prohibited because it was so poorly written by the Minister Blair in his office at the time. And again, if there had been consultation back before this, there may have not been quite such a mess. But now, of course, we're stuck trying to figure out how to deal with this regulation, and we're currently going through that. Now there is some consultation, but the slow turning wheels of the government are very difficult to fight through, especially when you have such a convoluted program. One thing a lot of people don't understand about these firearms is they're so modular in nature, and there's so many different moving pieces, and they're kind of like a Mr. Potato Head of guns type of thing, where you're snapping different pieces on. And some of those pieces are prohibited, some of them are not, but some of them can be used in other firearms, some of them can't. And therefore, they're trying to figure out how to properly gather all the information that is required there.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask about that because there certainly is a huge, huge market for accessories for firearms, and I've not been told, and you may have a different perspective of this, but I've not been told that a gun buyback would extend to accessories. So there may be no real way to recoup that money.
Well, so again, we only get to deal with the business aspect. We have no interest or no communication on the individual buyback.
But I mean, from a business perspective, if you have a bunch of accessories in your warehouse, which maybe you can return to the distributor, but maybe you can't. I mean, there may be no compensation for that and no retail market for it now.
Yeah, no, there has been extensive consultation on all the parts and the different components of the firearms. There has been an extensive discussion going on about that. Obviously, from our dealer's perspective, because so many of these things are modular in nature, we wouldn't be a part of anything if the parts and accessories were not included. So we've been a large discussion on how those parts will be compensated for, especially from those of our members that are manufacturers. They don't want to have to take the time to assemble these firearms to be turned in. It makes no sense whatsoever to put that extra expense on there. So, they have bins and bins of parts of these manufacturers, and they need to be compensated for as well.
Just in closing here, I'll ask you, Wes, about what the dollar value would be. Not an individual dollar value, but in general, the approach to a dollar value would be that would take the sting out a little bit. Because if the government were to say, we'll reimburse you for the cost you purchased this at to businesses, that doesn't really take into account the warehousing, the opportunity cost, if they had to, take out debt, for example, to buy the inventory in the first place. But I also don't think government really wants to be enriching, or in its view, enriching business owners by paying a premium. Like, what would the reasonable middle ground be?
Well, there's probably, what is the current retail value of that item is probably where the current middle ground is. It absolutely does not compensate us for our losses. Whenever you have inventory tied up for 3 years, there should be 6 to 12 turns on that inventory, and we're not going to get compensated for that, and we're well aware of that. But at the same time, storage and insurance costs aren't being compensated either. So our losses are still going to be immense. But the middle ground that I am assuming we're going to hopefully end up at is the retail value for the items, and that's remains to be seen if that's where they go. But it still won't take the sting out of it, and especially the biggest cost that our businesses have is the training of staff. But yes, we have so much invested in the marketing and the training of our staff, and the sting of that will never go away. It's something that businesses had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in, and that's all out the window, and it's an absolute collapse of that part of the industry.
Wes Winkel is the president of the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. I thank you for making your way through the tech issues there. You solved them better than anyone else we have on the show is usually able to. So thanks very much, Wes. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.